Hello, everyone, and welcome to SPED Homeschool Conversations. Thanks for joining us tonight, and especially for those of you who are joining us live. Just know that if you are joining us live, you can put your comments and questions in the feed, and we would be happy to address those. We are wrapping up our month of talking about tests, evaluations, and tracking data, and have an exciting innovation to talk about tonight with a dad who was spurred on by his own child. And I think, so many people that I interview on this show, it's our children who have pushed us to do things that we normally probably would not have done. And so we just welcome you, Nikody, and thank you for being here tonight and sharing with us about tracking data and some innovative ways that you have developed to help that easier for educators, and you're sharing it with the homeschool audience for the first time tonight on our broadcast. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. This is great being here. It's such a great venue to be able to talk to people and really help people out and help kids out, which is the goal of pretty much all of us at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So,
definitely. Yeah, we have a lot in common. You have a son on the autism spectrum as well as I do, and that challenges us because we want to find ways to connect with our kids, to help educate others about them too. And that's really what we're going to talk a lot about tonight, isn't it? Taking this data that we have and being able to share it in a way that we can advocate for our child and to help them to reach the potential that we know they have. And sometimes they don't even understand that. So.
Well, and that's one of the really cool things about data is data can be challenging in terms of trying to keep track of it. I mean, if you think about a human being, our memories are only so long. We can only remember so many things before we start forgetting. And then we kind of take that information, we condense it together so we can keep track of that while doing all those other things that we're supposed to be doing, like teaching our children.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes we get so tired and sleep deprived that we're like functioning on coffee, and that's about it.
Yeah, and so being able to actually take a look at tangible data, data that is no longer anecdotal information, but data points, allows us and others to really take a look and give suggestions, be productive in what we think is going on matched up with what is actually going on. And then having those data points allow us to say, hey, I think if we try, let's say, a ham sandwich midday, let's see what that'll do. And having the actual data points where you can say, hey, that affected it a little bit, where typically speaking, you'd say, I didn't see much of a change.
Right.
Data gives you those aspects to be able to break apart those problems and really remove all of those barriers that block children from engaging in their own education.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's, parents often ask me, what's the purpose behind this? And then we're going to dive into that as to, just like you explained, data is, it's important because we tend to let our feelings, especially as moms, let our feelings get in the way a lot. And data will kind of put us in our place sometimes if we've been having a bad day or a child's having a bad day. We can't conflict with what the data shows us. So
and I think that's a universal truth for us dads too.
Yeah, probably. So can you tell us a little bit just about you and your family and just how MytabTrack got started? And then we're going to dive into the data and information.
Yeah, so a little bit about me. I've been in software since before 1999. I was on mapstopping.com before it was out and available. I worked on Xbox before it came out. I was the architect for the Coca-Cola Freestyle soda dispenser, the one with the touchscreen where you can get orange Coke.
Right.
I was on that. I've been on a lot of startups and a lot of innovative companies and innovative technologies, including a small stint at Boeing as a solution architect, where we're connecting together new technologies to make it so that people can accomplish a lot more. So
Yeah.
then my son, who is now 7, entered public school for the first time. And he was diagnosed with autism when he was, I want to say, 4.
Okay.
And we had been doing the early intervention. We'd been doing, actually, it's probably before 4, now that I think about it. But we'd done early interventions. We did the, pre-K public education system. And so we were making that transition from that to public education kindergarten.
Right.
And we ran into issues right away around, we were being told, hey, your child needs to be moved to an independent learning center or an ILC classroom. And my wife and I were like, wait, this doesn't match up with anything that we'd heard about. And it had progressed on to there's behavioral issues. And some of those behavioral issues turned out were absent seizures. So in absent seizures, it doesn't show itself like what we think of like a grand mal seizure. Right. What it is the child looks like they're staring off into space, or they could even be walking, brushing their shirt, but inside the brain, they're having a full-on seizure and they become unresponsive. And so we were getting some of this feedback, and right around that time period, we'd started him on medication. The medication started taking effect, and the absent seizures went down. They still pushed him into the ILC classroom, but right around the time that we were getting ready to do his IEP, which was in February, March timeframe, at home in January and February, we started having him have bathroom accidents at home. Now, for a child on the autism spectrum, that could be behavioral, it could be medical, it could be an absent seizure.
Right, exactly.
And so we weren't getting reported any of this information from the school, that there was anything going on. And so we finally bit the bullet and said, okay, well, let's just change the medication just to see. And we changed the medication. We started seeing less bathroom accidents at home, and we went in for his IEP meeting. Well, in his IEP meeting, they had actually written in a report that he had had bathroom accidents multiple times while at school that we never got told about.
You never,
And I was floored. Like, I'm one of those parents who is a very strong advocate for their children. And this was the beginning of my self-education process. Because I'm sitting here going, what the heck? Why aren't you guys letting me know about this? Why aren't you, like, you tell me that he's having issues like paying attention in class too. What does that actually mean now?
Right. And it doesn't help you if you get the information once a year at an IEP meeting.
No. And so I started looking into it, and at first I was very frustrated and upset with the teachers. And then I came to a realization. The math for teachers just doesn't work out. So let's say you have a general education teacher, and I know this is mainly focused on homeschool, but this is my experience. You have a general education teacher. They have, let's say, 15 students that are assigned to them in elementary school. So that means they're teaching 15 students. A special needs student has somewhere between 6 to 8 symptoms that you're generally trying to keep track of. So they're trying to keep 6 to 8 symptoms in their head. And at the end of a class, or at the end of the day, they get to sit down and write out, how many times different behaviors and symptoms occur, and maybe write you some notes. And as we were talking earlier, like, all that information is now being compressed. They're trying to keep track of that while teaching a class and engaging students. And then you take the ILC classroom, and that has 6 to 10 students, all with special needs. And so that's like somewhere between 60 to 80 symptoms that you're tracking in your head. That's impossible, especially when it's challenging enough to track one child's symptoms. So I started looking at what we could do to make it easier. And that's where I came up with MytabTrack. And the idea is that I want to make it easier for teachers to collect data, but have the type of data that they're collecting be more valuable than what they're able to provide right now. And so I took an AWS IoT button, it's this big, and turned it into a behavior tracker. So click once for one behavior, twice for another, hold it down for 2 seconds for a third. And it communicates at that point in time via Wi-Fi that the data was collected, which means that there's no extra step. You don't have to remember to plug it in at the end of the day. You don't have to remember that you're supposed to go and write a report up or send information. The information is collected right then, which means that you as a teacher or as a parent stay more in the moment and more engaged with educating your child rather than trying to remember what you need to remember that you need to write down and tell doctors or therapists, etc.
Right.
And I mean, I'm going to get a little bit ahead into like where I saw this going is I wanted to be able to share this same information that I get from my teachers and myself and my wife with our doctors and the child's therapists and everybody else who is in that big support team trying to help this child succeed.
Yeah, so we have to tell our parents about, just making a team because they can't do it all alone, especially, as a homeschooler, we tend to isolate a little bit more, but definitely being able to utilize those therapists and those doctors. But then getting them the correct data is sometimes difficult because you are in the moment so much.
Yeah, well, and the fascinating part was the first IEP meeting that I had with my IEP team at my son's school. We brought up the information and suddenly a dialogue that was about, well, what do you mean? Or is he getting better? Changed into, we were actually able to look at tangible data going on throughout the week. And we had the school psychologist, we had the school principal, we had the director of autism services, and we had the special needs teacher and his general education teacher all in the same room, all problem solving how to make this child's life better, rather than trying to have a discussion about what does it mean.
Right, because you had enough data to start solving problems versus just having, sketchy information here and there, which made a huge difference. Yeah, definitely. So, we tell parents basically to set about 3 goals a year on their IEP. So it's kind of interesting that you have the way to record 3 different pieces of data on your instrument, because if you go over that, you're tracking way too much. Is what we often tell parents is like you have to hone in on what's most important and track that information. And so let's talk about why goals are so important for setting when your children are facing struggles.
Yeah. So one of the things that was part of that education is I work a lot with child psychologists. And the problems that you face when dealing with a special needs child or a child, any child actually, is you have a part of the brain that's the hippocampus. This is the animal part of the brain. And then you have the prefrontal cortex, which wraps over that hippocampus, right? And typically, IEP goals and functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans are based off the fact that the child is acting with their hippocampus or their lizard part of the brain. This is the part where like they're in distress or they're no longer able to focus on their education or be part of or be engaged in a lesson. Right. And so the goal is to get that prefrontal cortex in a place where it's down. Like they call it flipping their top when they're thinking with the lizard side. We want the other way. And so having goals allows us to focus on specific aspects and really hone in on how do we make it so we get rid of these low-level things that are blocking the child from engaging in education.
Yeah, definitely, because we definitely don't want them to stay there and and just talk about all the things that they struggle with. We want to progress them in a direction where they're they're making strides to improve, definitely.
Well, and it's also fascinating, the more the child's engaged, the more the parent is too, or the teacher.
Yes.
Because it's kind of that mutual aspect. If the parent's dealing with all of these challenges that kids are facing, which we do, sometimes we have challenges that, we need to take a step back from or whatever. But if you think about all of those challenges we face, that's less time that we're actually engaged. And we as humans just like to be engaged. We get excited.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I forgot to change the slide. I know we were going to go through your slides here as we were talking.
And I like my logo too. I mean, that's a good one.
Yes. So that's just a little bit of information about you. And so definitely wanted to just talk about, I guess we talked a little bit about just some ways that goals are traditionally tracked on IEPs and some of the issues with that. We definitely went into that, with the teacher, but I've even seen it, with homeschool parents, is that, we can set a goal and then we just forget that it's something that we need to do, or it's just one too many things on the schedule for today, and so it just didn't get written down because we've got multiple other kids that we're teaching at different age levels too. It's not that we're maybe have a special needs classroom, but oftentimes we maybe have 2 or 3 struggling learners, and unfortunately, all the other things that come with teaching from home as well, and all the distractions with that too. So there's many things that come into play.
And that's where, like, when I started looking at this problem, I wanted to keep people in the moment. I wanted the parent to stay in the moment. I want them to stay engaged. I want the teacher to stay in the moment. Like, everybody, the more that we pull ourselves away from those engagements with the child, which even like trying to keep track of something in your head is pulling you away, the less effective we are. And so the more we can make it so the parent doesn't have to try to remember something. They can do something in that one moment and then continue on. I think that just opens up the door for all sorts of possibilities.
It does, and it makes you think on the more positive versus the negative, because when you're trying to solve a problem and like you say, retain that data, we tend to go into reactionary mode versus being proactive. Just because we're trying to, it's that self-preservation. We've got to keep all this in together, and so I love that. That aspect, because definitely it is a hard task to do, is to stay in that moment and to really focus on what would benefit the moment and the child and everything around it at that time. So definitely. So what are basics that parents should understand about effective goal tracking?
So like you said before, you really only want to have a maximum of 3 goals. And those 3 goals don't necessarily have to be 3 specific things. For example, hand flapping, or being distracted, or fidgeting, right? Or something to that effect, where the child's not on task, can be grouped together. So making a couple of generic goals where you don't have to think too much about it, but you can track it very easily, is good. The second thing is, when you think about goals, you want to think about what are those things, like what are those base level things that are blocking the child from really participating and engaging. And with goals, one of the interesting aspects of goals is we're not necessarily asking the child to change all the time. Sometimes we're asking ourselves to change to accommodate the child. And so when you think about goals, don't think necessarily about, I have a child that has these issues. It's about, we have these issues that are blocking the child. And then the last thing that I've been lucky enough to have been introduced to by a very, very smart set of PhDs out there, is the concept of, don't only track negative. Tracking positive also allows you to track some of those things where you can work on children's strengths.
Yeah.
Definitely. And as a child gets more engaged and more excited about learning, it tends to bleed over into all the other aspects. It's in the same way where, sometimes if you have a child who is acting out or frustrated, who's younger, having them give you just a high five and then asking them to go and do something gives you that behavioral momentum that bleeds over into some of those other things that they're less likely to do.
Definitely. Yeah, we've seen that. And that's one of the advantages of homeschooling, definitely, is especially with my kids, I found that, I build on those strengths because they did have struggles, and that got us through a lot of hard times when they knew that something fun was coming up that they liked to do, even though it was educational. It was something that was in their wheelhouse that they liked to do. But being able to track that and see where your child is having those highs and lows during the day, and as you're watching those highs and tracking them, that could be some really good information for you, even as you're looking at your week by week plans and how things went, or
and to that degree, it also helps you understand what some of the problems are, because talking about the genericizing data in our heads, right? We kind of clump it all together. One of the things that I ran into was my son's teacher said he was having issues with reading. What we found out while tracking the data is that he's doing great for the first 30 minutes of reading. It's the last 15 minutes of reading. And as we dove into that, the teacher started recalling more information because they had those data points. Which allowed us to identify, he's actually not having issues with reading, he's having issues with the writing portion. And suddenly it starts opening up some of those doors where you may have had preconceptions as to what was going on, and having data to either back it up or disprove it allows you as the parent or as the educator to move past your preconceptions.
Yeah. I never even thought about that. It's a good way to look at it, because we do block that time, instead of thinking of all the different components that were happening in that instruction. And it could sometimes be the handwriting. So all this, but if it was, actually the writing concept, or maybe just their hand is tired. I know my son, because of his dyslexia, he could read for the first 5 minutes fine, and then fatigued, and it took another person coming in to our instruction to say, this is what's happening with him, because I just thought he was getting lazy. but if we would have been tracking, on a daily basis, I think I would have seen that a lot sooner. Definitely.
Yeah. So, and you wouldn't have had to bring somebody in. You could have actually just shown them the data, gotten their advice, and being able to implement it much more quickly.
Yeah, definitely. So that's one way we can gain information for ourselves, but also tracking data helps with advocating outside. So what are some ways that we can tell families that, this is good not just for your own instruction or for if your child goes to school, but how does this data that you're collecting help in advocating services and other things with other people that you're working with your child?
So one of the challenges with all services is it's based off of oftentimes anecdotal information. My son is having problems with this. My daughter is having issues with that.
Yeah.
And without tangible data, oftentimes you're forced into, we need to do testing. We need to do all of these various activities to actually see where it is your child fits in our spectrum of services. And then on top of that, you get maybe a day to bring your child in. If they're having a good day,
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of hoping for the worst at that point. You're like, come on, just have the day that you normally have.
Right.
And so you have that aspect. Then you also have the aspect of, are they receiving the care and the services that they need? And how is that affecting those care and services?
Right.
And that's where, as we've moved forward with this product, we're finding more and more that by allowing the entire community of people who work with your child to have access to this very detailed information, it opens up a lot of doors. Suddenly, instead of saying, hey, my child's having problems paying attention, hey, after 5 minutes, like, I'm having, 15 to 18 prompts to get back on task for the next 15 to 20 minutes. You suddenly have very detailed information. And for somebody coming in to observe, be able to see the difference between that as a baseline and what they see as to what you've reported suddenly gives them a lot more context as to what's going on with your child. The other thing is like, as you share this information, you're really asking others to engage more because they have a feedback loop. And so that whole community around you suddenly has a way to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to, let's say a dad, for example. I ran the kid outside, for 30 minutes before work. And, I went back in, but that 30 minutes of running around made a massive difference in the education process. And sometimes that's what's needed, is a little bit of burning off excess energy. And so it allows more people to get engaged in helping the child than typically would have access, because usually it's the person observing the child or who works with the child on a daily basis who has to come up with all of the solutions.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not really the case. It's that one person has all of the context and has knowledge of kind of the general patterns, which forces them into that position of a solution maker. The more we can allow more into that detailed information and get insights, the more they'll self-engage in helping the child succeed as well.
Yeah, definitely. I know I've talked with other parents. They said, I go and talk to professionals about my children, and they think I'm just making things up. And they say, one mom even told me, she said, I'm taking pictures on a regular basis. I am to my doctor because all of a sudden now they're believing me. But it seems like you have to have so much data to convince, doctors and professionals that you're not crazy. You're not the only one that's seeing this. It is observable. And so the more information that you can gather, and like you said, to have enough information to create a dialogue. And I think that when you go in to talk to people who have all these credentials, they're like, well, yeah, you're just a parent, and and we, like you said, we need to assess them and do all this. Well, I may just be the parent, but I'm the one who lives 24/7 with this, and I know what I'm talking about. And so,
and to give doctors a little bit of a break, the types of information that they're used to getting is very vague at best.
Yeah,
I actually saw a statistic out there that said 80% of what doctors are diagnosing are treating and providing diagnoses on has no actual evidential base to it, because they don't have enough information to make an evidence-based decision. They're getting big pieces of information, they're reading tea leaves, and then they're saying, okay, I think you have this issue.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. And like you said, it's, based off of tests that are done in a very short period of time. And then they have to make a broad spectrum, diagnoses based on just that little bit of evidence. And so the more that you can bring in, and we tell parents this too, is, tracking data for their kids over multiple years, because they say when they go to ask for accommodations in college and say, why didn't they give them to me? Well, if you just told them that and you couldn't prove that you've used them all the way through school, I'm sorry, they're going to say, that really doesn't make a lot of sense. We all of a sudden allow these accommodations on their college entrance exams. So yeah, data speaks for itself. And and having a much easier way to track it is definitely a blessing for us all. So do you have any stories to share with us on just how your MytabTrack has been used to help families to be able to advocate?
Yeah. So we're pretty early in our process, but so we've had my experiences, and then we've had schools. I don't have access to the information, the detailed information that is being tracked, because we're not only HIPAA compliant, but we hold ourselves to a very high bar around privacy. But what we've gotten feedback on is that the product allows teachers really to focus in on student education, and teachers who have problems with keeping track of the information that's supposed to be reported are having a much easier time. Administrators in education are finding that this information is helpful for making sure that the student is getting the services that they require. So from an audit purpose, from a tracking if the child is being supported perspective, this data is being seen as kind of a way to communicate that information to a different type of audience. The first time that, from a personal experience, first time I took this information to the Seattle Children's Hospital for my son, his doctor took a look at it and was like, wow, we never see anything like this. We've been able to identify that my son has ADHD as well. And so we're getting that baseline to be able to see what his normal attention behavior looks like. So as we prescribe medication, it's no longer anecdotal information such as, oh yeah, he's doing a lot better. Well, relative to what?
Right.
So
exactly.
We're going to start
information from before as well as after, so you can gauge it.
And the doctor can take a look, prescribe medication, and say, oh, well, he's having issues right during this period around when the medication wears off, according to my knowledge of kind of those medication arcs. And so they can adjust the medications for that. They can also even take a look and say, well, you say it's working really well, but we can do better and eliminate even more of those things that are blocking the child from their own education. So we're really excited about that. And then we've also heard a lot around behavioral issues. So not just special needs related, but a lot of schools are looking at this as a way to track behavioral issues to help eliminate those, the antecedents, behavior, and result concept, and to really hone in on how to help students who don't necessarily have IEP worthy condition,
right,
but have behavioral problems that don't allow them to reach their potential.
So there's something going on that's causing that, and just be able to track back to what might be triggering and what they're doing as a reaction to it. Definitely.
Yeah. And then the final thing that we hear a lot about is using MytabTrack to help diagnose. So when somebody's like, you know what, I think something might be going on, having that information where you're tracking and you're getting tangible information allows you to then take that information and use it to help identify, is this really what we think it is?
Definitely. Yeah, I think a lot of parents come to us and say, well, I think my child has. And so, yes, to have enough data to be able to bring that in along with when your child gets assessed, to say, well, this is the cycles we've been seeing. And so that would definitely be helpful information to add to that, because you don't, as a homeschool parent, a lot of times we don't diagnose because we just kind of accommodate naturally to our children's needs as a homeschool parent. And yet if our children start taking classes at a co-op or doing other things, we kind of go, oh, I guess I never even noticed this before. So yeah, that's definitely something to think about our slide disappeared, and I know we were going to just dive into now you giving us a demonstration. So I'm going to see if I can get that to come back up again here on my screen.
So while you're doing that, let me start talking about the platform a little bit.
Yeah.
So what we've done is we've taken some of the latest technology and really focused in on making something that was A, simple to use, and B, didn't provide a solution in and of itself. The biggest problem with trying to make something that's a solution to special needs is there's not a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah, we were talking about that beforehand, definitely.
Yeah. And so like you can try to go out and make like a solution around autism. And there's an app out there called Autism Tracker that is specifically focused on autism. Now, is it focused on all the aspects of autism? Not necessarily, but there's people who go out and try to make solutions for one specific thing. My whole concept is we needed to make something that was simple. It needed to be easier than what people had to do before. And where a lot of people are coming from before is I track things by observing, keeping them in my head as to what happened, and then after the fact, at some point, I'm going to disengage from the child and go and write these things down. Which, to me, at that point, you've kind of lost because you're already pulling away. As you're saying things, you're like, I really need to remember that, which means you're not really focused on the moment. So we have a system where you see a symptom, or a symptom occurs, or a behavior occurs. You click the button, and the symptom's tracked. You're done. That's basically how simple we've made it. This device here is HIPAA compliant, which means that we're medically grade compliant from the moment you click the button. And then you can put a label on here that says we're tracking 3 different symptoms. So let's say mom is sick and you have to have somebody help watch the kids. Like, you know, you're out, you're on vacation, something's going on. This device can actually be handed off to a babysitter, to a person coming in, like a relative, and they can track the exact same things you were tracking just by clicking the button. And you don't have to worry about information being taken and shared somewhere inappropriate. Right,
because it's all going somewhere else.
Exactly. From that point, if you want to go to the next slide,
sure.
We capture all this information in our platform. And we're bringing it together to give you a lot of context as to what's going on. So the first thing after you log into our platform is that top part, which is the dashboard.
Right.
And you can customize your dashboard to track those things that you're really interested in tracking for your specific child. We have different types of graphs. So on the left-hand side, we have a line graph that's tracking occurrences on a daily basis. The middle one is a bubble graph, which is going to show you clusters of events. So where are the times throughout the day where you're having the most issues? And then we have a line graph on the right that's actually showing positive peer interactions. And so that's the stuff where as you log in, that's kind of your snapshot of the week. Then you can go into a student-specific day. And in here, you can actually create a schedule and save it as a template so you can easily load it over and over again. But this is where it breaks down the behaviors and symptoms and puts them relative to what's going on in the student's day. For example, a set of behaviors occurring right after reading starts could actually indicate that you have a transition issue. You don't have necessarily a behavioral issue. The child is experiencing an issue with that transition from one activity to another. And so you get a lot of context as to what exactly was going on when those behaviors and symptoms occur. You as the parent afterwards can even go in and write notes and then share this information with doctors, therapists, other, like your teachers and your support staff at the public education system. And suddenly everybody has access to this very detailed information, which means as a doctor takes a look or as a therapist takes a look, they can give you advice even before coming in to observe you, which means you're getting advice much faster than you could otherwise.
Right, because otherwise it's going to take them probably days or weeks to observe and then to come back with that same information, if that detailed information, because you've got it through multiple different scenarios throughout the day that they can't sit in your house or in a classroom for an entire day's time. They've got too many other students that they're working with. So you're able to cover that without them having to be there.
Yep. And they can work it into their own schedule. So they no longer have to like set aside a specific time frame where they have to block everybody else out. They can just go on, take a look when they have time, get you the feedback very, very quickly.
Yeah. And the scientist in me is saying you have way more scenarios that you're putting, in front of them than they could ever have in a short period of time, that they could synthesize to watch your child go through too. So that's good information.
And one of the things that we've done recently, which isn't shown on this slide, is that we've made it possible for them to download a Excel, Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets compatible file. So they can download the information and be able to look into even more things than we look into, in the sense of they can try stuff out. They can put in algorithms. They can kind of come up with their own things that they want to add to this data, which suddenly gives them a lot more flexibility around how they use our system.
Huh. That's amazing. Very cool. All right, should I head to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this gets a little bit more into what we're talking about around that community. Is as a parent, you're really not alone. And it's one of those challenges that like you face as a parent is you have a special needs child, you feel like you're the anomaly. I mean, I've felt like that before. I've had days where it was really hard.
Right.
You just feel like your child is the one who's not engaging. Your child, and what you find out is you have this massive team around you. And they all want the best for your child, like your doctors, other educators, other parents. You have just people in your community who may be ABA therapists, but would love to help you with the advice that will help make your life and your child's life better. And so what we want to do is we actually want to connect people with data that's actionable and allows that community to really contribute and help the child get past their issues that are blocking them and help the parent engage in a way that really they wouldn't be able to on their own.
Right. I'm thinking, too, is our parents have a hard time telling, like if they go and join like a homeschool co-op where they have classes, or even families that go into churches and their child has behavioral issues. If they were to be able to present information in an understandable format to the people that will be working with their child and say, okay, from what the data that we've collected, we've seen that our child, has issues at this point, instead of, well, in general, this tends to set them off or whatever. But you kind of speak in generalities where if you did have all this data, you would say, we know for sure this is what we've been tracking, and we can tell you that when these instances come up, that this is how he or she reacts, and or the behavior that we've seen, and this is how we then mitigate it. You can have all of that prepared ahead of time, and just saying, well, I know he does this, whenever, but we're not exactly sure what caused it. That oftentimes we're left with that vague information we give to people and just say, well, you deal with it like we deal with it. But to be proactive by having information that you can articulate well, I think that's really important.
And talking to that point, one of the features that's coming out in the next month is the ability to be able to track duration activities. So if your child has something where it sets them off and it takes a certain amount of time for them to come back down and be calm, we're doing something where you click the button either once, twice, or 3 times for that behavior to start. Then you click it the same number of times and you can stop it. And it'll actually start tracking the durations of those activities, which suddenly makes it possible to use those same concepts of, hey, this is what we're seeing. And if somebody else comes along and says, hey, let me try something, and they're able to show that they can reduce that, you can come back and be like, hey, what did you do there?
Right,
Or
exactly.
what worked this time that I didn't do before?
That would be really good information to, because like you say, we're in the moment, and especially with those things that cause meltdowns and other things like that, we're just glad when it's over. We're not thinking about how long did that. It seemed like an eternity while it was happening, anyways. But yes, just to be able to say, oh yes, this was shorter. I mean, that would be encouraging for everyone around to be able to say, oh yeah, this is how we worked through that and made a more positive outcome from that by doing this. So good information, definitely. Yeah, and being able to share it too with all those people. So yeah.
So this takes us into the settings menu for the child. And so on the screen, you can actually add other team members and just add them with email addresses.
Okay.
You can add anything as a behavior. So it can be, anything from disengagements to seizures to a smile if you want. We're not going to limit you in what you can track. We have a couple of things that you can do with these behaviors. You can subscribe to them for every single event. So let's say a seizure event. You can get a notification as soon as that occurs. Okay. But we also go that next step and we build up an artificial intelligence around each individual student that learns that student's patterns. And so you can sign up and say, tell me when this pattern changes, which is even more interesting.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Like the example of my son where we had him on absence seizure medication and he started having symptoms occur again, we would be able to see over time that process tick up if we were watching it manually. But even better than that, having an artificial intelligence says, this is interesting, this is different, you need to pay attention to this. Allows us to focus more on our child than trying to interpret all of this data that we're doing.
Yeah, because it can be a lot of data, as we're looking at, just all this information, and to be able to have, something that is constantly reviewing it and comparing it and saying this is noteworthy or this is typical. Definitely good information to have.
And we make sure that the student's information isn't shared even in the artificial intelligence's analysis. So the AI doesn't actually know what a symptom is. Okay. It sees numbers and says, okay, this number has occurred this many times. And it kind of works through everything so that no matter what, your child's information is maintained very, very safe. Right.
Yeah, and that's important to know, because I know we, especially, parents that pull their kids out of the school system, they just want to make sure that the information that they share is only with the people that they want to share it with, and I definitely respect that.
Well, and that to that degree, the occurrences of those symptoms and behaviors doesn't actually get matched up to the name of it, of what's being tracked, until it's in your browser. It doesn't even get connected on the server. So like the context of what it is and what's going on isn't merged together until it's actually in your browser.
That's great. That's good to know. Yeah. Very innovative, definitely. So I think there was one more slide here.
Yeah. So going back, we can create daily schedules, which gives us context as to what's going on. We're tracking 3 of the most important symptoms and behaviors, which lines up with the best practices around tracking and working on symptoms and behaviors, of special needs kids. It doesn't require an app, so you're not taking out your phone. I don't know about your kids, but when I pull out my phone with my kids, They
Right.
instantly think game. We're FERPA compliant, which is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. We're HIPAA compliant, which is a health
The health one.
one. And then we allow you to download and actually do more analysis yourself than what we offer, because our goal is to empower you as the parent or as the team member to be able to get this data in the most meaningful way to change a child's life.
So if you had members on your team, so say a homeschool parent was working with a therapist, how would they share that information? Do they have a separate login, or do they just pick and choose the information they want to share with that person?
So you go into the child settings screen and you put in that individual's email address. And so that person that's going to be joining your team has a completely separate login from yours.
Okay.
And that, like, adding another person is free. Like, we operate on a per student basis, not a per device or per team member basis. So you pay for your student. Our price point's $20 a month. We provide the buttons for free. So if you need one button, great, you get a button. If it breaks, we replace it. You no longer have to keep in mind how much it costs to purchase a button as to if you're going to be working to improve your child's life.
Right.
And so we wanted to remove all those barriers. So it's one price for the student. Your team members come in for free.
And so then when they're pushing their button, it's programmed through their Wi-Fi to then hook into that same account. So their information, if they're doing therapy, if you're taking them to the babysitter or whatever, everybody's information's all being merged together.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Yeah. And so yeah, you don't have to be getting a full detailed report from that person. You can just go in and look at, how the data showed the information you're tracking. Of course, you kind of want to know what they did, but definitely it makes it easier to get your summary at the end of their time with that person, so that you again can focus on the moment of what was good about what happened versus let's just focus on all the behavior that we were tracking.
The other thing that you don't have to worry about is a paper being dropped. Like, I've had this happen before where I got the wrong person's piece of paper. And all those issues go away when you have a button and all you're doing is clicking.
Right. Definitely. Well, this is it's been great listening to all of this information, because it's an incredible invention or idea that you came up with to make it so simple. Like we were talking about before we started, you definitely don't want to replace it with something as complicated as the process was before. And this definitely simplifies this process incredibly. And I can see definitely the benefit that parents could use this in their homeschool, as well as how you're seeing it utilized in the public schools, and it's making a huge difference there as well.
Yeah, well, and I think we have one more slide on here.
Yep.
But one of the things that we're doing is we're doing a free trial of MytabTrack. And so if there's a homeschool parent that wants to try it out, us at welcome at MytabTrack, and we'll hook you up. We'll get you set up. We'll make sure that you have all the tools necessary. And if you find it helpful, then let's worry about that then. But let's get you set up, because I believe, making it easy to capture the information makes it possible for people to change lives.
Yeah, I agree so much. So yeah, and that's your website, mytaptrack.com. And yeah, it'll be interesting to hear what homeschoolers come away with. I know I talked to a couple that I talked about, your innovation, and they're like, wow, that would be would be great. I think some parents more than others would be open to using it, but I think the more we share how we can use data in our homeschools, the more open people are going to be to exploring other ways to to track and keep data and then use it for our unique situations as well. So
and one of the challenges that we all run into is whenever we think about data, we always think about more complex. We think about,
yes,
I'm going to have to do all of these other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I would challenge your listeners that go use our product. If there's something that's costing them to have to sit down and spend a lot of time doing, let us know. Because my whole theory is, let's eliminate all those things. Because if you're running into it at homeschool, other people are running into it in other walks of life.
Yes,
and so the more we can collaborate together to create a solution where it really doesn't take as much effort,
right?
then we're all better.
Yeah, we all benefit, definitely. And in the end, our children benefit from us being able to see beyond, just like we were talking about when we first started, seeing beyond the original reactions, actions, to get down to the things that are happening that we should be focusing on, or that that we can help our children to deal with the struggles that they're experiencing to make it easier. Definitely. So, well, thank you, Nikody, so much for your time. This has been a really interesting conversation. You don't know how much you need data until you talk about the reasons behind it, and then offering us a new way to look at using it, and how AI can really help us see beyond just all of the information, like you said, to to just pages and pages of data don't help us. But when we have things that are able to interpret it for us and give us some really good takeaways without much time, I think can really save us a lot of things that we maybe do wrong for a long time before we figure out we shouldn't be doing it. Which, having homeschooled for 18 years, I've done a lot of those things.
I think that's part of the requirements for being a parent.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, we're not going to perfect ourselves, definitely. But we can there's always room for improvement, definitely. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. We didn't have any questions, but I think we used up our time adequately anyways. And you definitely gave us a lot to think about. And I'm excited to hear how some parents might use your product, and how they can help you with just seeing how it's going to work in our environment, as well as in the school environments too. So yeah, and MytabTrack is on the SPED Homeschool website under our special needs on our special needs partner page, and so you can find their information there as well. And these videos will be underneath your listing also after we get them edited and published on our YouTube channel. So that's exciting. So we're wrapping up this month on testing, evaluations, and data tracking, and had a lot of good information this past month. And next week we dive into our new theme for June, which is summer learning. And we're going to be talking about using museums as resources for hands-on learning. And we're going to be interviewing Stephen Craig, I'm going to butcher his last name probably, Polis Castrato, from the International Association of Creation. And one exciting thing about that interview is we have created some free downloadables for you on guides and checklists for if you're going to the museum, how to make it more accessible. So we've got that to share with you next week too. So So thanks for joining us on SPED Homeschool Conversations, and we'll see you again next week right here. Let's keep the conversation going, though, on our support group on Facebook. And thank you to the Learning Disabilities Foundation of America for partially funding this broadcast, and also for viewers like you who donate to our nonprofit. Thanks, everybody, and have a good night. And thanks again, Nikody, for joining us. We appreciate you taking your time out to inform us about your innovative product and just some new ways to look at data. Definitely very interesting. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.